I began my career not as an industrial hygienist, but as a registered nurse. And I took care of patients with severe occupational injuries and illnesses, and I tried to decide on a career path that could allow me to prevent these injuries and illnesses. The Temple University program had a Master's of Science program in industrial hygiene, and they actively recruited nurses to study industrial hygiene because they thought we had the broad-based scientific background to be successful industrial hygienists. After completing my academic requirements, I began my internship at Merck & Company in West Point in Pennsylvania, and they soon hired me as an industrial hygienist. And I was able to learn from very influential industrial hygiene and occupational toxicology leaders such as Dave Kirk and Ed Sargent. The pharmaceutical industry was very dynamic in the late 80s and 90s, and the drugs that they were developing were much more potent than any that had been done before. And this increase in potency challenged all the paradigms in the pharmaceutical world for setting OELs and evaluating exposures and even controlling exposures. Paradigms that we needed to break through in order to control the exposures to the workers resulted in the beginnings of control banding. The control banding approaches for the various pharmaceutical companies were shared, and we met regularly with other hygienists throughout the industry to talk about what we were collectively experiencing. We established goals to safely develop these drugs and get them to market, and we shared our common approaches for occupational exposure limits and control technologies. These control bands then were shared with our engineering staff, and we were able to include the appropriate controls into the design of facilities and laboratories and processes. And we effectively were able to launch these new drugs onto the market safely, and our employees were protected. That introduction to developing hazard and control bands and influencing the inclusion of appropriate engineering controls into the design and the redesign of pharmaceutical technology and equipment paved the way for the areas of industrial hygiene that I hope to influence now and in the future. At NIOSH, I coordinate the Prevention Through Design National Initiative. Prevention Through Design seeks to eliminate hazards and minimize risks by designing in the appropriate controls. The industrial hygiene professional partners with the engineer and the designer to accurately identify the hazards, assess the exposure risks, develop the risk mitigation control strategies, select from the appropriate controls, procure the controls, and then verify that those controls have been accurately prescribed and installed. It's an incredible amount of work for the industrial hygienists to expand the whole industrial hygiene process to all chemicals that can cause adverse effect to workers, not simply those with an occupational exposure limit. But the occupational exposure limit is then replaced by an occupational exposure band. That occupational exposure band provides that design target for both the industrial hygienist and the design engineer. This, I believe, is the future of industrial hygiene, and it will allow us to support the development of new technologies such as nanomolecules, nanomaterials for which we have very little information can be brought to market, we believe, using an occupational exposure banding and control banding approach. The American Industrial Hygiene Association will continue to foster the kinds of collaboration that is needed for the industrial hygiene community to make the control of all occupational diseases a reality. Thank you.